Hi everyone, good to be here tonight. Good to be nominated to the Diamond list. I like this very informal setting. It feels like an open mic night or something, but climate just as interesting. So I'm Adam Hearne, the CEO and co-founder of CarbonChain. I was previously in mining for 12 years and most recently at Amazon for 3 years, managing the European supply chain. And we noticed that there was a very big issue with looking at the emissions of supply chains, and they're a majority of the world's emissions, but it's very hard to measure. So my co-founder and I decided to start CarbonChain so that companies could measure and then manage down their emissions and hit net zero. And I think we're starting to see how many companies are pledging net zero by 2030, 2040, 2050. And a lot of these promises are going to really come to fruition and companies are going to have to deliver. So that's the problem CarbonChain is trying to solve. So just to give a bit of a background, in terms of the challenge, it's really hard for companies to do their carbon footprint still. You've probably seen a lot of carbon footprints published by companies, but they're not entirely accurate. BCG did a recent study and they found that most carbon footprints are about 40% inaccurate from a corporate. And we know why, it's very challenging. And in order to do a very accurate carbon footprint, you need to know your scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. I'm just going to touch upon them briefly to set the context of what CarbonChain is solving. So scope 1 is your own direct emissions, like a company car. Scope 2 is the electricity that you buy. And scope 3 is all the other indirect emissions that are outside of your control. So that's like the goods that you've purchased. And that's a majority of the world's emissions are scope 3, very difficult to measure. So that's where CarbonChain comes in. So we then analyze that complexity and we give companies verifiable and auditable scope 3 emissions footprints, but importantly, the whole company's emissions are tracked by CarbonChain. So one of the projects we did was just for a consumer product, the ubiquitous can of Coke. How would you do the carbon footprint for that? So we have the answer. It's very difficult, but we got there. You have to go back to source material. So if you wonder why companies can't do more scope 3 reporting, it's because even for a simple can of Coke, they have to find where the aluminium was mined from. Prior to aluminium, you have a bauxite stage. You have to find out where that was mined. And then also the ingredients, like what is the carbon footprint of the corn syrup in the sugar in the Coke. So companies can't figure that out, but we can. So a can of Coke actually is 460 grams of CO2 for the full fat version. If you were to do the Diet Coke, it's 380 grams, so another reason to give up sugar this year. But it's very complicated, and now we've been able to automate this, and we do probably 20 to 30,000 calculations similar to this every week for clients all around the world. So some of the world's largest commodities traders, some of the world's biggest manufacturers, even Apple. We've done a couple of components for Apple, and as much as Tim Cook loved our report, he wouldn't give us permission to publish their case study on the website because they're very secretive. But a lot of companies need to do this very detailed version of carbon footprinting. So that's what CarbonChain helps with. Customers get multiple benefits. One, we can give them breakdowns of all their activity. So this is a customer's dashboard. They happen to be a commodities trader. We've been able to see where their emissions are. They can then benchmark. So if they're buying something, what is the global average? Let's be better than the global average. Let's be greener. And then interestingly, in, I guess, a first time in a generation where you've got banks that are giving interest rate reductions for companies just measuring their emissions. So they don't even have to commit to reducing the emissions. We're seeing banks give interest rate reductions straight off the bat. And that's a good growth driver for us. And also great that companies can do this for financial reasons and get rewarded for it. So how do we measure things like the can of Coke? We have to have a very big database. So we're building the world's largest database of emission factors. And you can see a small example of how we do it. So we have almost every commercial ship in our database with individual emission factors. We have every mine in the world, literally, there's no more mines that we need to look at. We have all the refineries, oil wells, pipelines, and that helps us calculate very accurately. So as a good summary here, metals, lithium, all these sectors on the board are responsible for about 72% of the world's annual emissions. And it looks very niche, but that's where that's where you need to tackle to reduce emissions. So the vision for CarbonChain is that we can become a one-stop shop for companies to measure and then manage down their carbon emissions. We have a platform that can currently measure, verify, find reduction opportunities, purchase offsets, and track progress on the platform. And we basically need to rewire the economy so that it thinks about having Mother Nature on the balance sheet and prioritize things accordingly. As a quick photo of the team, currently we've had 3 more starters since that photo was taken 6 weeks ago, growing rapidly. What's next for CarbonChain? We'll be doing a raise later on in the year. For the next 3 months, we're just trying to hire because we've had so much sales demand that we're having trouble keeping up. So we're actually looking to hire frantically. So if you or anyone that you know is of an engineering nature, data science background, software engineers, we need you. We need these sort of activist types that just really want to get in and get their hands dirty and help us build the world's largest carbon emissions database. We want the hidden figures, the pioneers, the activists that see that the system is largely insufficient and can do something about it. Thanks for hearing about CarbonChain. Cheers.